The same thing that made Derek Carr's final days with the Las Vegas Raiders unsuccessful could be the thing that makes him most successful with the New Orleans Saints. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, continue the conversation one-on-one with me over at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You can find me every Tuesday over on the Locked On NFL podcast and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, it's brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. What's going on, everybody, and welcome into another live episode of Locked On Saints as two-a-days here on the show continue to roll along. Happy Memorial Day to everyone, and a big salute and thank you to all those who, I want to say, like, big thank you. You know what I mean? It's a tough day, and I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a conflicting day for me too, in terms of like my family and all those other things. So it's always kind of hard, but it's a good day. It's a good day, and we say thank you. On today's episode, I want to take a look at a couple of different things here. We're going to be looking at Isaiah Foskey, Bryan, Bresee. What are some of the kind of initial hurdles that they need to make in order to be, NFL impactful NFL rookies in 2023? We're also going to take a look as well at Derek Carr and his ability to help the New Orleans Saints elevate their offense versus what we've seen from the offense over the course of the past couple of years, especially last year with the Andy Dalton, Pete Carmichael offense that kind of had a little bit of, didn't have the success that you had hoped with Jameis Winston and Pete Carmichael to start that year. And so I think that when it comes to that, which is where we're going to start, the thing that makes Derek Carr's last 2 years in Las Vegas a little bit of a struggle is actually kind of the thing that should allow the New Orleans Saints to be able to maximize Derek Carr's abilities and for Derek Carr to maximize his abilities and elevate their offense with the New Orleans Saints in 2023. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that a big portion of what happened with Derek Carr over the course of the past couple of years, double-digit interceptions, all those other things. I think it's a little bit tough to call the Las Vegas Raiders' last season on offense a successful season, although Derek Carr was not a part of two of those games toward the end of the year. The reason why doesn't really come down to Derek Carr. It's not like Derek Carr got to a position here to where he just all of a sudden forgot how to play football or, took a sharp decline or anything like that. This year will kind of prove whether or not it was a Derek Carr decline or if it was something else, but I'm willing to put money on it being something else, and that something else being Josh McDaniels and the system that the Las Vegas Raiders had last season. Let's just be honest here. The system in Las Vegas hasn't been good for a while. I mean, the John Gruden days with Derek Carr were pretty solid, and then that all kind of came to its very tumultuous end, and then Rich Bisaccia took over. You had the interim head coach, and then you turned things over to Josh McDaniels, who has found success in the NFL as an offensive coordinator when he was paired with Bill Belichick, but hasn't ever really found success, Josh McDaniels, as his own kind of coach play caller. That has not been a successful pathway for him thus far, and really being away from Bill Belichick hasn't really been successful for him. And I think that that's funny. I think that the other thing that you have to consider too, just the kind of get this out of the way is that the defense in Las Vegas / Oakland for Derek Carr has never really been that great. Has never been within the top 20. Derek Carr has never played with a defense that had his back in that way. Hopefully the Saints will be able to maintain their success over the defensive side, which will help with that. But the thing about it is that, and that's a really good point too, not only did he only have success with Bill Belichick, he only had success with Tom Brady. And well, duh, right? Like, of course you're going to have success with Tom Brady. And so I think that looking at Derek Carr, what you now can see is that he is a little bit, I don't want to call him scheme dependent, but he's the type of person where you put him in a good scheme and you put him in a good system, and he's able to elevate that system, execute that system. If you have him in a system that doesn't support him, no matter how good the supporting cast is around him, because remember, Devontae Adams was there, Hunter Renfrow, who a lot of people are clamoring for the New Orleans Saints to have, was there. They had Darren Waller, they had Foster Moreau, who's now a New Orleans Saint. They had Josh Jacobs in the backfield, all of that. When you consider all that, you have to look at how were those players utilized and did the system support the talent? And I think it's pretty easy to see that the system did not support the talent in Las Vegas, especially last year, where it was a little bit of a kind of want to throw it deep type of mentality, even though you didn't have an offense, and especially an offensive line, nor a defense that allowed you to be able to make up for those mistakes. If you're going to be an offense that challenges downfield, you have to be prepared to turn the ball over. It's called a high variance offense. So if you're pushing the ball downfield and you're doing all of this, you have to understand that those are lower percentage throws downfield. And so there's a big difference between throwing behind the line of scrimmage or 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage to throwing 30, 40 yards down the field beyond the line of scrimmage. You're going to get a high variance approach in that way. And so you're going to turn the ball over. Look back at the Saints in, the kind of golden years of the New Orleans Saints offense. Drew Brees was throwing upwards of 20 interceptions in seasons because it was a high variance, deep attack, high flying offense. When that happens, you have to have a defense that's willing to, and that is capable of getting the ball back in your hands and being able to make stops, not allowing turnovers to turn into points. This was a big issue for the New Orleans Saints 2014, 15, and 16, where you saw one of the, or a collection of the three most successful seasons when it comes to Drew Brees and the offense's execution, but historically bad defenses couldn't hold the leads, despite the fact that the Saints were putting up 30, 40 points in some of those games. That is basically where the Las Vegas Raiders have been for quite some time, particularly over on the defensive side of the ball. And so I think that that's a piece that you have to look at and say, okay, if the New Orleans Saints are able to put together a successful system on the offensive side that supports its skill position players, that supports its quarterback, Derek Carr is the type of quarterback that can come in and elevate those pieces. Somebody in the chat right now just said that, y'all are forgetting about how bad the Saints coaches are, quote unquote, which we'll have to wait and see. But I think when you look at what Derek Carr comes in and is able to do for you, despite just kind of being willing to, me, I'm not somebody that's willing to come in and say this thing is bad, that thing is bad, but I will say this thing needs to be fixed and this thing needs to be improved. And that's kind of the point of Derek Carr. Derek Carr is there to help you improve the offensive system, which needs to be improved from last year. I think that is a fair thing to say, but I wouldn't go so far as to say, well, the Saints are screwed, it doesn't matter, everything's bad, so throw it all out the window. You got to do something here. You got to go out there and play. You got to try to come home and bring, these fans some victories every now and then. And if you're not going to do that, then get out of the NFL. And that's not who the New Orleans Saints are. The New Orleans Saints are absolutely dedicated to competing. They're absolutely dedicated to winning. And so when you look at sort of the high variance offense that the Las Vegas Raiders ran, that was the system that Derek Carr was able to run and that Derek Carr was comfortable running, but didn't have the support elsewhere, particularly on the defensive side, when it comes to the high variance. Turnovers turned into points for opposing offenses. The Saints, are not going to be a high variance offense. They're going to be an offense that still wants to stretch the field horizontally, will look to attack vertically, but is still mostly going to focus on their West Coast concepts, the things that keep them scheming and doing all the things to scheme and create separation for their wide receivers, as opposed to relying on the wide receivers to create separation for themselves, which is an important delineation. And on top of that, the next piece that you look at is that you're not throwing the ball downfield and you're not putting the ball in harm's way. Then you add on the defense to where when you do take those shots downfield. If they don't work out and you do turn the ball over, you have a defense that can get the ball back for your offense. And that's a huge difference when it comes to Josh McDaniels and what he tried to do with Las Vegas and what the New Orleans Saints will try to do with Derek Carr at the helm. There's a big thing here in the chat right now that I absolutely disagree with. Somebody saying that Jameis Winston is the starter, but that Derek Carr is overrated. Let me be very clear with you. Jameis Winston is very much not the starter. Derek Carr is the starter, and Derek Carr, the things that actually led to some of the struggles in Las Vegas should be the same things in terms of his ability to be able to run a system and his sort of definition by the system in terms of what we've seen so far in his career should allow him, if a successful system is put around him, to not only be the starter in 2023, which he 100% is, there is no doubt about that, but allow him to be successful and elevate the New Orleans Saints offense from where it was last year with Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at the rookies, particularly first and second round guys, Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey. We're going to start off with Bryan Bresee because he is one small but large, if that makes sense, adjustment away, or let me not say adjustment away, but improvement away from being exactly who the New Orleans Saints need him to be, and he's surrounded by the right people to make that improvement sooner rather than later. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and of course our official sports betting partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And right now, if you have never used FanDuel before, it's your lucky day, because FanDuel, if you head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn, you're going to be able to sign up and get a no sweat first bet of up to, are you ready for this? Are you listening to this? $2,500 that can come back to you if your first bet doesn't win. Up to $2,500 will come back to you in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And it's FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use, especially with their app. So go and check them out today. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. You can head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. It is a live episode here on this wonderful Memorial Day. Thanks, everybody, for being here live or for being here later and for catching the show. Appreciate you, as always, for continuing to support, and for all you everydayers out here for making the Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. So the next thing that I want to look at here is Bryan Bresee, because Bryan Bresee was a guy that, as he was coming out of high school, was the #1 recruit in the country. He was ahead of the guy that went 1.1 this year, which, of course, was Bryce Young, his same high school class entering college, and then, of course, same draft class coming out of college. Bryan Bresee was ahead of that guy going into college. He went to Clemson, had a great, freshman year. I believe he was like freshman of the year that year, and then he ended up sort of dealing with injuries, personal life stuff, the death of his little sister, Ella, all these other things. So there's so many sort of pieces of context around Bryan Bresee. But the one thing that you know about him is that when he's healthy and when he's on the field, he is very, very hard to deal with if you're an interior offensive lineman. Now, the biggest improvement that you're looking for from Bryan Bresee, and perhaps the biggest hurdle or roadblock that's ahead of him, is simply health. He has to prove that he is going to be healthy at the next level. If he's able to do that, then that's a huge hurdle for him to clear. He did tell us that this is the best that he has felt, but everybody says that to some extent. We'll have to wait and see what he actually looks like once he gets out on the field and once the season begins. But I'm inclined to believe him for now. Now, when it comes to the thing that's kind of the element of his game that you would like to see him improve, that ends up being a really interesting one. And the big thing that you want to see him improve is his ability to be able to contribute more to the run game. And that's not just as simple as making tackles or things like that. It means that when an offense runs directly at him, things like that, and he is kind of the focus of the blocking scheme, he has to be able to work his way loose, fight through, and be able to make some stops. Now, he's got a great motor. He's got a great set of moves, all those other things. So the biggest thing that you're looking to be able to adjust with him is simply his ability to be able to be present and make those plays and find a way to limit the run game. His ability and his sort of what it is that he does as a pass rusher, that's his specialty. He is a 3-tech penetrating pass rusher that attacks sort of between that tackle and guard and is able to, work through double teams in the pass rush game, all of those other things. He's got the versatility to line up further out wide and then be able to move inside, but I think you're going to see him spend most of his time inside. The biggest thing is going to be, can he find a way to make sure that he is getting the consistent leverage that he needs in being able to maintain gap integrity and cut off some of that run game. And some of that, like I mentioned, doesn't mean that he has to be the one to make the tackle. Don't get it twisted. Not playing on the interior of the defensive line isn't all about the plays that you make. A lot of times it's about the plays that you help others make. So he'll need to be able to occupy and stack some of those blockers and hold on and keep those blockers engaged for extended periods of time. That's going to open up additional paths and additional lanes for him. He got a lot, let me say, when he was in college at Clemson, got a ton of extra attention on the interior. Guards and centers teaming up together for the ace blocks, guards and tackles teaming up together for the duo double teams, all the things that you see teams do to be able to get their run game going. And he would sometimes be neutralized in terms of his attack there and get moved off of his spot and stuff like that. So a big part of what he's going to have to do is be able to engage and anchor, not get moved off the spot. If he's able to do that, then all of a sudden he's opening up pass rushing lanes. He's opening up run fit lanes for some of the second level players to be able to come downhill and make some of those tackles. These are things that are never going to show up on a stat sheet, right? Like there's no such thing as something that shows up on the stat sheet that says, hey, Bryan Bresee held his own and opened up a lane for a, run stopping downhill, Demario Davis or Pete Werner to be able to penetrate, get into the backfield and get a tackle for a loss on the run game. Those are the things that you're going to need to see from Bryan Bresee. And if he's able to start to develop those things sooner rather than later, it quickly makes him a 3-down interior defensive lineman for the New Orleans Saints. And that's certainly the expectation for him. I think that it would be more surprising to not see him be eventually the starter, even if it doesn't happen week 1, to, be the guy that gets the first set of snaps on 1st and 10 from the 25 with 15 minutes still left on the clock, over guys like Nathan Shepard, Malcolm Roach. I think Colin Saunders plays a different position. I think he plays that 1-tech, 0-tech nose tackle type. So he and Bryan Bresee, Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard should be able to coexist quite a bit in the NFL or for the New Orleans Saints defensive line. And so the look at where Bresee ends up being able to make a big leap is actually not necessarily just him making plays, but opening up opportunities for others to make plays. The thing that you can kind of rest easy on when it comes to Bresee is that that he's going to be able to be, as long as he's healthy and on the field, which again, we expect will be the case for him, as long as he's healthy and on the field, he's the guy that's going to be disruptive. He's the guy that's going to be able to get after the quarterback. He's the guy that's going to be able to make quarterbacks' lives a little bit more challenging because of the importance of pass rush from the interior. A lot of times when we talk about the pass rush, we're talking about the edge rushers. That's where the majority of pass rush pressure seems to come in the NFL. It's less congested. It's a little bit more wide open. You can utilize your speed and power moves. You can speed to power convert. You have a little bit more freedom as a pin your ears back from the edge type of pass rusher. But when you're on the interior, it's a little bit of a smaller space. You're operating in closer corners. You're operating within a telephone booth. You're not necessarily able to pick up speed. You can't line up out wide and try to beat somebody around the edge. Those are things that are going to have to, that you just kind of have to win with your ability to be able to be a pure pass rusher. And Bryan Bresee has that skill set. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why he's a first round guy. It's one of the reasons why he was the number 1 prospect in all of the NFL. You know what I mean? And so the way that I look at where Bryan Bresee gives you what it is that you're looking for, much like we discussed about him early on before the NFL draft, is that he gives you the pass rushing presence. The Saints very clearly want to be an attacking, aggressive, interior defensive line. That's one of the reasons why they went out and they got guys like Colin Saunders as well as Nathan Shepard. Both of those guys ranking very, very close to the guys that they're replacing in terms of Shai Tuttle and David Onyemata when it comes to run stop win rate, but they are several spots above and beyond when it comes to pass rush win rate. Bryan Bresee, one of the better pass rush defensive tackles in this year's class. There were only really a couple of those guys. And so with that you know what you're getting in Bryan Bresee, but can he be the guy that you can also rely on to create opportunities for other players, eat up double teams on the interior to free up gaps that the second level players can shoot, picking up those double teams on the interior, which then creates those one-on-one opportunities for the edge rushers over on the outside. So a guy like Bryan Bresee holds within his role the opportunity to not only be able to make himself better, but make the players around him better too, by freeing them up for additional opportunities. And one of the guys that he's going to be able to help out for many, many years to come, if all goes well, is former Notre Dame pass rusher, now New Orleans Saints second round selection on the edge, Isaiah Foskey. He has a little bit of a different situation that he's got to be able to kind of tick up a little bit in order to have an immediate rookie impact. But if Bryan Bresee ends up doing what he needs to do, it makes the job a little bit easier. Let's get to Isaiah Foskey next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at Isaiah Foskey. Want to say thank you to everybody who's here live in the chat. Albert, Jerry, Randy, Neil, Joe, I see you. 777, I see you. Neville, I see a whole bunch of folks. So I appreciate y'all very much for being here for another live episode. Oh, Kevin too. I want to say I appreciate y'all very much for being here for another live episode, and for everybody, of course, that's here catching the show later. On tomorrow morning's episode, we're going to be taking a look at what we want to learn about the New Orleans Saints defense in the second week of OTAs. We talked about the offensive side in this morning's episode. Tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, we'll take a look at the defensive side. And then once OTA practice is over and then I get home, we'll go live and we'll go over everything that we kind of saw and heard throughout the second portion of OTAs that is open. So I appreciate y'all very much for being here and making us your everyday show here on Locked On Saints. Appreciate y'all. All right, so let's jump into the Isaiah Foskey situation here, or not situation, right? Just what is it that Isaiah Foskey can do to make himself a little bit more impactful right away? And I think the biggest thing when it comes to Isaiah Foskey is that he's like practically pro ready. And we discussed this before he was drafted as well, that he would be somebody that makes a ton of sense for the Saints in the second or third rounds, and that he was a guy that comes in with massive production, a pretty good pass rushing repertoire, good counters, which is unusual for a collegiate defensive end coming into the NFL, but he's a guy that's able to get second, third effort pass rush success and pass rush wins. So that means that if he gets stalled initially by an offensive tackle or whomever it is that's trying to block him, and he gets stalled immediately, then he usually has a counter and then a second effort and then a third effort to be able to get into the backfield. And that's the type of thing that you love to see. That's a really good sort of canvas to start with. So the thing that's going to make Isaiah Foskey a little bit more impactful right away is going to be dealing with the variety of tackles that he's going to go up against. If you look back at his collegiate time, particularly in Big Ten environments where he's playing against, some NFL offensive linemen, you look back at the Ohio State game that he played, for instance, dealt a little bit, not so well with the power of Paris Johnson, but also got stymied by the sheer reach of DeJuan Jones. And those types of players are in the NFL on almost every roster across offensive lines. And so he'll need to sort of develop a specified pass rushing plan that's built for who he's going up against. Now, the way that this ends up getting done or the reason why you should have some confidence that this will get done, is that he's going to be lining up and practicing and in the film room and studying every single day with Cam Jordan, who does something similar to this and has had a lot of success. Cam Jordan has beaten every type of offensive tackle that's out there. Isaiah Foskey has all the tools. He's got the makeup and he has the production. He knows how to win and he doesn't give up. He doesn't take snaps off, all of those other things. So those are the things that we're going to see when it comes to the improvements that you want to see around Isaiah Foskey. And much like with Bryan Bresee, the reason why you should feel comfortable that these improvements can be made really comes down to who's around these players. And so a defensive line coach like Todd Grantham, who has found success as a defensive line specialist. I know he struggled a little bit in the collegiate ranks as a defensive coordinator. Days at Florida, days at Florida weren't great, but when it comes to what he's done as a defensive line specialist, it has worked out. Dennis Allen has consistently put together solid defensive lines. Ryan Nielsen, of course, was a huge part of that, but Ryan Nielsen's not in the building anymore, so that's where Todd Grantham has to be sort of the neutralizer. And I think when you look at where the Saints have continued to build on the defensive line and the way that they've done it, it's clear that Todd Grantham and the New Orleans Saints, they want to attack. And so if you want to attack, you got to be able to put together an attacking defensive line. So with all of that piece, there's going to be an opportunity there for guys like Isaiah Foskey and Bryan Bresee to work with the right people to be able to kind of kick them in the butt and let that, improvement that they'll need to make one way or another, and that you should expect one way or another to happen maybe sooner rather than later. So for Isaiah Foskey, it's just about developing sort of that understanding of how to put himself in positions to win against all these different types of offensive tackles, the power guys that stymie you immediately with their strength, the anchor guys that can sit back, let you come to them, and then just boom, sit down and then hold on. And that's where leverage is a big part of the conversation. And that's definitely a place where Isaiah Foskey can learn to maybe change that leverage, know when he needs to utilize it in different ways against different styles of pass blockers. Similarly, you've also got these tackles that have long arms, a lot of length to their, and a lot of size to their name. And so because of that, they have the ability to just boom, get that initial punch and hold him up. And then that's where sort of those second, third effort plays are going to be important for Isaiah Foskey. So he's going to struggle probably early on when he's facing a variety of different type of offensive tackles. For the Saints, look for them to try to free him up on stunts and twists, get him a little bit of a running start, be creative in terms of being able to allow him to be disruptive in ways that aren't just about him going from a three-point stance into an offensive tackle. Look for them to mix it up. Similarly with Bryan Bresee, these are things that not only the players individually can get better at, improve, and jump the hurdles, but these are things also that the Saints can game plan for specifically and be able to scheme up opportunities for them to be able to isolate these guys and utilize them as pass rushers, get them involved in stunts, simulated pressures, things like that will allow them to be able to pick up a little bit of speed, be the speed to power conversion guys, and all of that. So I think that those are kind of the big things that you look at where you can say, okay, here's how the Saints can make these players better, and here's how these players can individually get better at the same time. So it's all good news for the New Orleans Saints. At least it is until we get to the point to where, we're seeing it not work. And once we see it not work, then all of a sudden we're talking about it a different way. But as of right now, when everything's projection, when everything is, kind of looking ahead and saying, hey, here's what they could be, here's what could happen, it's all positive at the moment. But you can see that those things are absolutely there and attainable, not only for the team, but also for the players. Okay, got a couple of different little things here that I wanted to make sure that I address from the chat. I got a question here that says, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, but were you going to include fans into the outro sometimes in your video? Is that still a thing or no? Yes, it is absolutely still a thing. And I'm so sorry. Once I started doing the two-a-days, I kind of got really into tunnel vision with the content, and then I completely lost track of that. So I will reset all of that in tomorrow's episode so you know what to do. Let me get you the details and the information so that I'm not doing it in haste here. But in tomorrow's episode, I'll explain that. And I would love for us to be able to do that. I'm so sorry. I got super just focused in on creating content for the show that I lost all that. So big thank you. I'm seeing all the compliments and everything in the chat. I really appreciate y'all. And I'm seeing the dissenting opinions too, which is also awesome. I love conversation. I love dissenting opinions. I want it. So I appreciate everybody for coming in and being able to do that. And you know me, we have the opportunity to be able to go over some of those dissenting opinions. And look, I can argue whatever you want me to. So it doesn't make any difference to me. I love it all. All right. So thank you so much, everybody, for all of the... sorry. Here's the other thing that I wanted to address. Kevin Meadows, thank you so much for reminding me. What's the holdup with Foskey and his contract signing? Don't worry about this. I think there's still 25, 26, maybe a little bit less. It's in the 20s. Second-round players that haven't signed their contracts yet. This is very common. If you remember right, last year's second-round selection, Alante Taylor, didn't sign his contract until July 20th, July 21st, after training camp had begun. Isaiah Foskey's at the facility. He's been on the field. That's all that matters. The contract doesn't matter. It'll be fine. They're probably just working on, different language and guarantees and offsetting stuff and everything. And they could also be doing this wise thing and waiting for more of those second round contracts to get filled out, signed, done, just in case some folks start getting above their scheduled pay. Isaiah Foskey obviously would want to take advantage of that as well. So that's where that is. Don't worry about the contract. It'll be fine. Appreciate you as always, y'all, for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints. Coming up in tomorrow morning's episode, the Tuesday morning episode, what are we looking to learn from the New Orleans Saints defense in OTAs week 2? Got that coming up for you and much more. Thanks as always, y'all, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you want to continue the conversation one-on-one with me beyond this point, head over to joinsubtext.com/lockedonsaints. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.